Welcome, everyone, to Red Planet Live. I am your host, Ashton Zeth. I am elated to be hosting the Mars Society's podcast and leading the conversation about human exploration of the universe and the future settlement of Mars. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today and supporting Red Planet Live by participating in our conversation. For today, we have two special guests, two exceptional women, including Ling, originally from Beijing, now based in Ohio, is a science journalist known for her coverage of space, astronomy, and physics, with contributions to publications such as the South China Morning Post, Scientific American, Science, Physics World, Nature, and others. She brings complex scientific concepts to life for readers around the world. So thank you, Ling, for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to chat with you. And our second guest is astrophysicist and planetary scientist Laura Forczyk, who is the owner of space analysis consulting firm Analytical and author of 2 books, and is a career coach who helps individuals achieve their dream jobs in space. Laura has worked with NASA-related research and the international space industry for over 15 years. Plus, she's an experienced space analyst, previously featured on various publications and different shows, including CNN, Bloomberg, New York Times, many others. So again, two exceptional women, excited to be chatting with you both. So thank you for joining today.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, as always, going to start the conversation with just a couple Mars Society announcements. The first is that our 2024 International Mars Society Convention is taking place this August, Thursday the 8th through Sunday, August 11th at the University of Washington campus in Seattle. Along those lines, speaking of the convention, the Mars Society is still calling for abstracts. So presentations for those speakers that want to participate in the convention, please submit your abstract. Those could be between 150 to 300 words and uploaded to the Mars Society's abstract page. Please note that the deadline for submitting those abstracts is Friday, June 28th at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We would love to see those. We're very excited for the Mars Society Convention this year. So please get those turned in, and we hope to see you there in Seattle. So we're going to kick off the conversation. We're diving right in. We've got an hour, and I want to get through as many questions as possible. I know we've got a couple already in the works from our audience members, so we're going to sprinkle those throughout. But on the podcast, I do a segment called Question of the Day. This is just meant to be an icebreaker. No right or wrong answer, I promise. It's easy. It's just your opinion, just so we can kick off the conversation. So today's question of the day, because you are both writers, authors, you're well equipped in the space industry and in media and communications, I thought this would be a good way to start our conversation. So the question is, what is your favorite space-related book or publication, and why? I'll give you a second. See, the wheels are turning. So favorite space book or publication. So it doesn't have to be a book. Could be an article. But what is your favorite space-related book? Let's see. Laura, do you have an answer off the top of your head?
I'm thinking sci-fi because I read, science fact all day. But then when I want to relax and think about the future and think about the possibilities, it's science fiction. So that's what I gravitate towards. And I'm currently rereading my favorite series ever, which is Dune. I've been in love with that series since I was a teenager. And I restarted, I'm rereading the whole series starting from when the latest movie came out. So I'm on book 5 right now. And so it's just like, I don't know if I could pick one of that whole series, but it just inspires me. Science fiction, it takes you to another world where we could potentially go and create new things for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And how timely, with the movies coming out, what a great time to go back to the series and reread those. I think that's a great answer. And I'm sure that a lot of the listeners and audience members would also say the same.
A lot of chats.
Oh, yeah. They're coming in quickly. I know. Let's see. What were some of those? Ling, what about you? What would be your favorite space-related book or publication?
Oh well, I haven't read a whole lot about of those, but I have started on the three body problem, written by a famous Chinese author, and yes, also started watching the Netflix theories of the three-body problem. I'll let you know what I think of it when I'm done. Yeah, but I heard like it's quite popular among Western readers as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, you'll have to report back and tell me what you think.
I will.
I love that we're getting a lot of the same Dune. People love the Dune answer there. I think that resonates. I'd say for myself, the first book that comes to mind is not necessarily Rocket Science by Kelly Girardi. And if you've listened to previous episodes, you've heard me say this before. But that book was kind of a breakthrough read for me because to me, it demonstrated that, a non-technical degree person could find their place in the space industry and eventually become an astronaut, and just proves that there really is room for everyone, not just the scientists and engineers. I love how, she showcases that space is becoming more accessible. So that one resonated for me. I would say that's probably one of my favorites. And of course, it's, recent. Kelly just went to space, so perfect choice. All right. We got past that. Let's kick off the conversation. I want to remind everybody, as you have questions for Ling or Laura, please submit those in the chat. I'll try to get those sprinkled out throughout the conversation. So let's kick off the conversation at the beginning. I would love to know where you both started. How did you both get started in your careers in space media? Laura, let's start with you.
Sure. So I loved space since I was a kid, and I didn't know what to go into when I was, trying to figure out where to go to college and what to major in. But I chose astrophysics because I wanted to understand the universe. And before I even went to college, I went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. In fact, I've gone 6 times, twice in middle school, twice in high school, and twice as an adult through a NASA Academy program. And it just inspired me to want to go farther than humanity's ever gone before. I grew up watching Star Trek with my parents, so just back to the science fiction inspiration, right? So that all that combined together brought me to major in astrophysics. And from there, it was just like an obvious thing. I wanted to continue on, but it wasn't until graduate school that I realized that I could also work in the space industry, because I thought NASA was like my only choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized as I got more and more involved and read more and just talked to more people, that there's a vast world out there of things you can get involved in. And so it really showed me that, yes, NASA's awesome. And I had NASA internships and I worked at NASA as a graduate student, but there's just so much out there. And so that's how I got my start, was just trying to, one step at a time, figure out where I belonged.
I love that. That's a great story. And I think, again, that was probably resonates with a lot of people that have been in similar shoes, and, they wanted to be an astronaut and always been inspired by space as a kid, that came from sci-fi inspiration. And, maybe they're still looking to find their way into the space industry. Ling, what about you? How did you get started in your space media career?
I didn't start writing a lot about space until recently. My background is more from science journalism one. By science, I mean basic science, physics and astronomy, like our understanding of the universe at the largest and the smallest scales. Yeah, I for the most part of my career, I was working for the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which is actually the largest research organization in the world. And I was mostly writing about physics, astronomy, and space missions. So the space missions in China is very different from the space missions here in the States. Of course, we are a latecomer to space science, but also we didn't have very I just say like a mature system to plan and select these space missions. So our space missions were decided more like on case by case kind of thing. So yeah, I used to write about the space missions hosted by the Chinese Academy of Sciences. That's how I got started with maybe my space coverage.
Yeah. Okay. And so now you're writing for South China Morning Post. How long have you been there? How long have you been writing with them?
About 2 to 3 years. But now I'm also writing about, like all these new missions that China has been carrying out. including the most recent one, the Moon Farsight Sample Return Mission,
Mhm.
for publications like Nature and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I heard you say moon, and that is a perfect segue. That was going to be one of my first questions. So let's focus on the moon for a moment. And Laura, I know I read in your bio that you have a dream of dancing on the moon. So that I thought that was so funny. So let's focus on the moon for a moment. I want to know from both of you, how do you see the current planning for a human return to the moon and the eventual settlement there? We're seeing various countries and different organizations and small private companies as well that are making efforts to get to the moon. So tell me about what you see with the current planning for a moon return for humans.
I love that we have this example of American missions and Chinese missions because there's so much to learn from each other. Because when I was a kid, I wanted to go to the moon. I didn't mention it earlier, but when I was in third grade, some book that we read in school about Apollo must have inspired me because I wrote a short story about going to the moon. And that has never left me. I've always wanted to be an astronaut on the moon. And when I was in graduate school, it was very Mars focused, which is appropriate for the venue here. It was all return to Mars and not return to Mars, but journey to Mars, and it like my heart was still moon. And so when I was studying in graduate school, I studied regolith. But then as the transition to Artemis, before it was Artemis, it transitioned into not just Martian regolith, but lunar regolith and asteroid regolith, and then more and more towards the lunar side. And finally, Artemis came into form. And it's like, yes, what I've been waiting for my entire career is here. However, we being Americans, we debate things endlessly and we compromise. And somebody in the chat has indicated that China's doing copycat missions, and I completely disagree. I think that the way that China's organized, because it's not so debated, there's less compromise, and they're able to go straight forward. So the Chang'e missions are just incredibly impressive. So like they've got the sample return, which we've never done. So I'm looking forward to not like an Apollo Part 2, but more like, how do we get there to stay? How do we get to the moon to actually create a lunar base? And the way that Artemis is currently structured, it's not focused on that. And I wish it was. Like, that's the one thing that I am currently like, what are we doing? We are focusing on these short-term missions. We are focusing on Gateway, which is a space station in orbit, but we're not focused on long-term surface habitation. And that's what we should be focused on, especially if we do want to learn how to live on Mars. And so if we do have that belief that we are going to the moon to learn about the moon, but also to learn how to live on other planetary bodies like Mars, then we really need to be learning how to create the long-term sustainability on the surface of the planetary body. And so I have this love-hate relationship with the way that currently I love Artemis, but I wish it was structured a little bit differently, but it is the consequence of our political system right now and how we have to compromise things.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on there. Let's see, Ling, is there anything you wanted to add to that point?
Yeah, I think Laura brought up very, very important topic is so do we have two camps now when it comes to going back to the moon? Should it be two camps, or should we try find a way to work together and try to take advantage of each other's skills and because it's very expensive and technically challenging to build a moon base, let's say. So yeah.
Definitely. Well, we talked about China, so let's stay on that train of thought. I've got a couple questions here. So, Ling, specifically, we know that China is reportedly developing its own reusable space launch system. Where does that stand now, and is it intended for low Earth orbit, lunar orbit, or deep space?
Reusable rocket. Did you say? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we're quite behind the U.S. because you have SpaceX. Yeah. As far as I know, I think the state-owned rocket developers are working on it, and also a number of private companies are also working on reusable rocket. But the best they have done so far are some like hop tests, the so-called vertical launch, vertical landing tests. yeah, nothing as near as to, the reusable Falcon 9 rockets. No.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna get into SpaceX, Blue Origin, but I'm curious. With writing for a Chinese publication, I'm sure that reporting for China on international audience can be quite complex due to some of the cultural, political, social nuances. How do you approach those challenges to ensure that your articles, your stories are accurate and accessible to readers worldwide?
Well, yeah. Well, I think I am actually used to write to writing for the international audience, even back when I was working for the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So that part was not very challenging, but trying to explain the science and or technical details is hard. And one way to do it is for me, because I have no background. I was not trained as a scientist, not like Laura, you know. So yeah, one way is to invite for comments for expert opinions as much as I can.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's like a difficulty or there is a contrast when writing for Chinese audience versus American audiences or the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think American audiences are very smart. Yeah. So yeah, um, um, yeah, there are also cultural differences when you write for the Chinese audience.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
I'm sure that there is a little bit of that contrast. So speaking of contrast, we've talked a little bit about Artemis, NASA. So we've got government programs, country program. Let's talk a little bit about the private sector. So Laura, I know that recently you had spoke about this, but wanted to get your thoughts and some details about how you see the current progress being made by SpaceX developing its Starship system.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? At this point, we're just waiting to hear the official announcement that the FAA has cleared them for another test flight, which I absolutely believe they're going to get to space to orbit and back this year. Whether fully 100% successful, I don't know, but I hope so because NASA has really tied the Artemis program to the success of Starship, with Starship being that lunar choice for the human landing system, they call it, to
Mhm.
bring astronauts to the surface of the moon for Artemis 3. And one of the things that people don't realize is that there's so much more at stake when it comes to carrying through with the Artemis program. So Starship needs to succeed and NASA needs Starship to succeed. And not only that, but the Department of Defense is also looking at how they can use Starship and how they can, tie in all the different capabilities of Starship. The huge mass to orbit, the ways that you can launch quickly and reuse quickly, like just the different capabilities. Now, what we don't know is how this is going to affect the price point, because a lot of people are
Mhm.
talking about how this might bring down, or this should bring down the price of launch, the cost of launch. But right now, there's no competition in this realm. When it comes to super heavy lift and reusability, there's nothing that's going to come close. We've got, New Glenn, we've got Vulcan. Those are heavy lift. SLS, of course, heavy lift. But when it comes to the same, cadence as Starship will hopefully be, there's nothing that comes close. So SpaceX has no incentive to lower price, but it is a significant capability increase. So
Mhm.
we'll have the increased capability, so that we do have a bottleneck right now when it comes to launch capability, especially after the start of the Ukraine war 2 years ago that kind of cut off Russian options. So now we just have the United States. Europe is struggling right now with its
Mhm.
delays of different launch vehicles, and
Mhm.
China just its own thing. China has a lot of things going on in the government and in the private sector in terms of launch, but as Ling mentioned, the commercial sector is behind, and also the government launches their own stuff. They don't, they're not going to launch Americans. American stuff is not going to launch on Chinese rockets. And so when it comes to looking at who's the competition for SpaceX, there is no competition for SpaceX in the near term, which as a someone who wants the market to continue to grow, you do need competitors, but at the same time, I'm like, everybody's cheering on SpaceX.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree with you. Yeah, SpaceX is leading. Everybody's cheering them on, but we're starting to see there's obviously other companies, like you said, Blue Origin with New Glenn. We've got Vulcan as well. So there are some other companies that are working to develop their own technology. So I'm curious. We see SpaceX, we see Blue Origin, we know the well-known names, but we're starting to see the emergence of smaller companies. Some that come to mind are Vast, Rocket Lab, Orbit Fab. Some of those smaller companies are developing their new technologies, and we're seeing the emergence of the private sector. So I would love to hear from both of you. What are some of the emergence trends, technologies, or opportunities that you are finding the most exciting for the space industry right now?
I'm excited about manufacturing in space, and that's small scale manufacturing as well as large scale manufacturing. So when you think about, for example, how do we manufacture, parts of supplies in space, manufacturing screws and wrenches, but also manufacturing like heart cells, like 3D printing cardiac cells that was recently done by Redwire, but then also the large scale. We're putting together space stations, commercial space stations, and some of them are modular. So how do you manufacture those kinds of large scale structures? Like International Space Station is modular as well, right? But that took so long. It took 20 years. It's not even completely finished yet, but we're going to kind of call it finished. And so how do you manufacture large scale, but more efficiently? And then how do you recycle the materials instead of leaving it up there in a junkyard orbit or burning it up in the atmosphere? How do you then take that metal or take that structure and recycle it or repurpose it? So all of that is just really exciting to me because it gets us off planet and learning how to live and work truly in space on a wide scale, more than we've done in the past.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with you there. That's a very exciting part of the industry right now. Ling, what do you think? Anything else that you're excited by in terms of technology or trends? What's most exciting to you?
May I just add one thing about
Yeah,
China's private space sector? Let's
absolutely.
not forget that. The Chinese government decided to support the development of a private space sector
Hmm.
just a decade ago through a policy called Document 60, known as Document 60. So that is why Chinese companies are lagging behind and they're playing this catch-up game. And once, like Laura said, once Starship succeeds, this gap between China and the US might be wider, actually. Okay, and then let's get back to your question. What am I most excited about? Something similar to Laura, for example, the Chang'e 8 mission China is planning to send to the moon's south pole in 2028. It will include, like trying to 3D print the moon rock. No, sorry, the bricks on the moon's surface. Yes, using technologies now being developed by a university in Wuhan, and probably their collaborators from other parts of China as well. So that will be exciting. That will be a part of the so-called basic version of the space, the moon base to be built by China, Russia, and their international partners by 2035.
Yeah. And to your point, like you said, it's been a decade is what you mentioned. Look how far only in a decade they have come with their technology. So it's something to be commended. It's a lot of great work, and we're excited to see what comes out of China as well. Laura, something that you said was making me think about the International Space Station, and I believe we just got a question about this as well. So perfect timing. So we've heard from NASA that the ISS is going to be decommissioned. Right now, the plan, as far as I know, please keep me honest, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it will be eventually disassembled, and then pieces of it are going to fall back to Earth, potentially burn up on reentry, but some of it's going to land in the Pacific Ocean. What are your thoughts about that? And this brings up the question from the audience. So you got a two-part here. Is there a way to extend the ISS to include other countries? I heard it was going to be scrapped. And this is from Nerd Warrior 0956.
Yeah, it's a good question. And my heart is with the International Space Station because my first full-time job was facilitating research on the ISS through ISS National Laboratory. And so I am going to be so sad to see the ISS go. It is approximately 25 years old if you count the time the first module was launched. So it is getting up there. There were ideas, plans, concepts of boosting it to a higher orbit to keep it going as a museum or just reusing parts of it. And I don't know about the extending it to other countries. Right now, I think there's 17 countries involved. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. It's it's not just the United States. There's the United States, Russia, Canada, European Space Agency with multiple countries, Korea. Like there's just multiple countries already involved. And I don't know if anyone's going to join the partnership when it's in the later stage of its life, right? Because 2030 is when NASA anticipates having a deorbit vehicle, which is currently, they're currently evaluating proposals. They expect to select a proposal in June for someone to build an extraordinarily expensive vehicle to deorbit the International Space Station safely, because you do not want something that large to be unsafely, uncontrolled, deorbited. That would mean that it could go over a population, and you don't want that because it's not going to burn up in the atmosphere completely. It's too big. So what they're going to do is position it over the Pacific Ocean. There's a point in the Pacific Ocean that's farthest from any other land source, and that's where we actually put all of our large satellites. It's a little graveyard in the ocean, which I honestly don't think is the best thing to do when it comes to all of this, but it's where we are right now in our current technology and our current politics. And there has been talk and there has been questions about, can NASA do anything else with it? And NASA kind of punts that back and says it would take too much expense and too many boosts to boost it up to a higher orbit to keep it. And then what do you do once you keep it? Because it's not just the United States that makes that decision. It's a collaboration. There's no way to separate it from Russia, which is why you have not seen it separated from Russia in the past 2 years, since tensions have been so high once they invaded Ukraine. So there's absolutely no way to make a decision without Russian involvement. Right now, all international partners except Russia have extended ISS lifetime to 2030. Russia has not, because it's every 4 years for them. And so they've extended it to 2028 with the expectation that they're going to continue to extend it past 2028. So if you want to keep it, you need collaboration, not just from the United States government, and I mean Congress, as well as the administration, the White House, but you also need collaboration from Russia, from the European Space Station, from Canada, from all the other players. Japan, I forgot Japan. I forget Japan. They're a major player. Like there's just too much involved, I think. So I'm going to be extremely sad to see it go. But at the same time, NASA does want to free up that expense. And instead, they're going to be relying on commercial space stations. Axiom Station is going to attach itself to ISS and then detach before ISS is deorbited. So they should be the first private commercial space station, unless somebody like VAST, which is a much smaller space station, can go first. There's also ones by Blue Origin. There's what's called Orbital Reef, and it's a partnership with Sierra Space and a couple of others. There is one by Voyager. NanoRex is the former term or the former company name, and now they're just going under the Voyager umbrella, and they are building the Starlab. So there's commercial space stations that NASA is funding, and then there's commercial space stations that NASA is supporting without funding. So there's just a lot going on. And when those commercial space stations are trying to raise money and trying to get customers, there's two things going on. They want the investors and then they want the customers. You can't have competition with government there. So the commercial companies are saying, you need to deorbit ISS when you say you're going to deorbit it, or else we can't get the money we need to build the commercial space stations. So there's just, it's so complex.
And you did such a great job right there of summarizing everything that's happening. No, I completely agree. And I'm also kind of bummed to see it go. I had a previous conversation with Rick Tomlinson. We had talked about different options, and he was a big proponent of the up orbit. Let's leave it there. Let's make it a museum. I would love to see, pieces of it come down so that we could at least get to experience it. I don't know how they would make that happen, but if there was a possibility that it could be taken down in pieces, returned to Earth. I don't know if it goes on a country to country tour so that different people get to see it, but it would be pretty cool if, the rest of us got an opportunity to experience it. So bummed to see it go as well. But maybe sometime. Well, let's see. We were talking about some of the different organizations, different companies that are involved in building potential new space stations. I'm curious, where do we see things stand in regard to Boeing's Starliner program? Is it supposed to have a crewed mission in the near future?
Yeah, the news of tonight, as of tonight, is that it's been delayed to some unknown date that NASA's not telling us yet. Unfortunately. So what we're seeing is that we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of the first crewed launch of Crew Dragon. So Boeing is now 4 years behind where SpaceX was. And when the two awards happened back in 2014, NASA anticipated that Boeing and SpaceX would be operational by 2017. And neither were. So SpaceX obviously got there first in 2020. And now we're just seeing Boeing continue to delay. And they've had so many problems. And it's a shame because you want that dissimilar redundancy, especially with the tensions with Russia. You don't want to necessarily rely on Soyuz. You want that to American vehicle availability so that you can have just in case something goes wrong with a Dragon's Falcon 9 has been so successful, Dragon's been so successful, but just in case you want something else, you want a Starliner or something. It's not going to be Orion was originally going to be able to go to space station, but then the concept changed, so you need to have something else. I'm actually curious, Ling, how does China view this with its Tiangong space station? Do they have dissimilar crew vehicles, or are they relying on one?
I think the government actually released a call to the private sector to develop like at least cargo. I think like uncrewed missions to the Tiangong space station. But I think the first batch selected were mostly like still state-owned and companies, not like a private company in the true sense. But they're working on it, I think. Yeah.
Ling, speaking of that, I know that China has launched a space telescope last year to study the sun. Can you talk about how that mission is going? And does Beijing have plans for additional astronomical observatories like Hubble or James?
Oh yeah, we do. We are actually working on a Hubble-like telescope, which is called Xuntian. Xuntian was originally proposed as part of our Tiangong space station. Believe it or not, scientists were planning at first to put it inside the space station, but soon they found out it was a bad idea because there will be vibration stuff to affect the observation. So the telescope just became an independent part of the space station. However, it is still included in the space station program, and it will co-orbit with the space station. It will fly maybe in front of or behind the Tiangong space station, a few hundred kilometers away from it, so that when there are things either like maintenance or exchange of devices or even putting a new instrument, you can just dock the two and let the astronauts do the job. That telescope, it has a very demanding designs, and it was originally planned to launch last year, actually, end of last year, but it didn't work. And the latest news we have is the launch has been postponed to 2026. So it is a very rare case in Chinese space missions because Chinese people like to keep everything on track in terms of time. But this time, it's really, really challenging to build that telescope. So that's why we have 3 years of delay, which is just incredible.
That's
It doesn't sound too incredible. That sounds actually not too bad.
Right? Only 3 years.
If you think about how long James Webb Space Telescope was delayed.
A decade? Like
I think so. More than that, I think.
Yeah, but it's so successful, no?
Yeah, and so will this Chinese one be as well. especially since they can maintain it. Because right now there's a debate. Are we going to go and maintain Hubble? The second to last space shuttle mission serviced Hubble, and that was going to be it. And now there's talk of a private mission by Jarek Eisenman of the Polaris program to service Hubble. And there's just all kinds of debate back and forth about whether you want a private individual to service Hubble. But Hubble was put in that orbit to be serviceable, unlike James Webb Space Telescope, which was in an orbit that's not necessarily meant to be serviceable. So there's gives and takes there about, at least you can service, Hubble because it's right there, at least when you had shuttle. But now we have Crew Dragon, and maybe they can do that. Maybe we'll see if NASA lets them.
Well, speaking of Jarek Eisenman, Laura, can you give us kind of an update on the Polaris mission? What's going on with that? I know that the crew was just on a media mission. I think I saw them on like Good Morning America or something. It was on while I was at the gym the other day, so I couldn't watch it. But tell us, what's the update on that?
Yeah, if you remember, was it 2 years ago that Inspiration 4 launched? Gosh, how long has it been? That was a private mission.
Yeah.
If the first free-flying Crew Dragon mission with 4 private individuals, Jared Eisenman right there, he fully funded it himself. He is a billionaire from a non-space company, a financial company. And he, after that mission, decided it was so successful, he was going to continue on. So he has the Polaris program, which has multiple missions. This first one is going to be Polaris Dawn. It is going to actually be the first private EVA, extravehicular activity. I can't talk. So they are right now testing, they've finished testing the SpaceX spacesuits, which was the sticking point. I think the point that delayed the mission so much to this summer, because it was going to launch like last year, and it got delayed to currently a date unknown this summer. Because of the spacesuits, because you want those EVA suits, those pressure suits, to be as reliable as possible, because there's no airlock on Dragon. So they are going to expose the entire Crew Dragon vehicle to space and have everybody, exposed to the vacuum of space, whereas 2 of the crew members are going to go out there, and 2 stay inside. They're all going to be exposed to the vacuum of space. So they want to make sure they get that perfectly so that it all goes well. But it should be a fantastic mission. We're all hoping it's kind of a new era where we have private individuals doing entirely private missions. 20 years ago, we had the first private individual, Dennis Tito, fly with the Russian government in cooperation with a private company called Space Adventures to the International Space Station. So that was the first private individual. But since Inspiration 4, that's the first entirely private mission. And I think it's just the beginning.
Yeah. 100%. It's such a great time to be able to witness all of these momentous occasions. We're watching history kind of unfold with all of these new missions, these new crew. We're seeing private crews get to launch, both in conjunction with Axiom launching via SpaceX, SpaceX astronauts launching, which NASA. We're seeing such an array of things happening, and it's such an exciting time. But I know we've talked a little bit about private industry. We've talked about NASA. We've talked about the moon, Artemis. Let's focus on Mars a little bit. Obviously, this is the Mars Society, and we're heavily focused and advocating for a human mission to Mars and the eventual settlement of the red planet. So as 2 people who are knowledgeable about global space programs, what are your thoughts on the current planning by the leading spacefaring countries, the US, China, Europe, India, Japan, to get humans to Mars within the next decade or so? And do you feel like there's a likelihood of cooperation between those countries for this effort?
There's nobody planning to get to Mars in the next decade, unless you're counting Elon Musk. Maybe he is. But there's no government program to get any humans to Mars in the next decade. There's no government program to get humans to Mars, period. What we have right now are missions to the moon to prepare to go to Mars. And we have the little bits of analog mission research and space, I guess, how do you want to phrase that? Space preparedness is maybe the way to phrase that, where you're looking at like what's long-term that you can bring, right? What are the medicines? What are the foods? What are the nutrients? What are the things that can stay on a long-term mission that we've never had to deal with on International Space Station? So I don't know if the Chinese government is looking into this, but I know at least with the United States and with ESA, there's no serious funding going towards human missions to Mars at this time.
Ling?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. For the Chinese government when it comes to astronauts on Mars, but the Chinese government is really working on its Tianwen-3 mission, which will return samples from Mars. Right now, the timeline is to return those samples by 2030. Um, and technically, we have the basic technologies because we have landed on Mars already, and we also have returned samples from the moon. So if you can combine those technologies and maybe do some improvements. What some of the experts I talked to, they said China should be able to, um, but we will see.
I love that. And NASA just put out a call to revamp their Mars sample return mission. So they had a ballooning Mars sample return mission that is halfway done. I don't even know if halfway, like a third of the way done, where you have Perseverance on the surface collecting samples, but then you need a vehicle to go pick up those samples and then another vehicle to take it back. So NASA actually just completed a call for proposals. My company, Astrolytical, is actually in partnership with one of those proposals. And NASA should be selecting those very quickly because they are under extreme pressure from Congress to select some kind of concept that will get those samples back to Earth, or at least 10 of those samples, those tubes back to Earth, so that we can study what Martian dirt is like and what Martian rocks are like. Yes, we have meteorites, but we don't know where the meteorites came from. So if you can figure out exactly, like I drilled here and that's where this came from, and piece together the geology of Mars better than we can from remote sensing, like that is really, really valuable, and especially valuable if you do want to send humans to Mars. You want to understand the environment you're going to send humans to.
Yeah. Laura, let's see. Can you add any context as to why NASA has put that call for other plans? What has been the delay and the reason that they are opening that up for other companies, other organizations to submit those proposals?
Yeah, it's been a long delayed and ballooning cost program, Mars sample return, under Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. And so last year, at the end of last year and early this year, you saw JPL pausing funding, or NASA pausing funding, JPL pausing funding, and laying off a significant number of people. And there was an independent review board that assessed that the cost is going to go as high as $11 billion for Mars sample return. And Bill Nelson, who is the NASA administrator, simply said, we can't spend that money. We don't have that money to spend. We can't spend that kind of money. We can't wait this long, because it was also delayed to 2040, I believe it would be, when we get those samples back. So NASA's currently evaluating all options, and I mean all options, all physically relevant, capable options that can use existing technology to get those samples back, or at least, like I said, at least 10 of those samples back, so that we can have the in situ material, but here back on Earth, we've got laboratories here on Earth. Now, the debate also is, should we be sending lots of little missions to Mars instead of relying on one gigantic mission that could fail? And I see it both ways. But I am now biased because my company's on a proposal for Mars sample return. But prior to that, I do see the advantage of sending little missions to Mars to study the in situ types of, laboratory equipment that we can send on a rover or on a helicopter and that kind of thing. And it's really just not only to understand the science of the planet, but also to prepare us as we want to go live on Mars, or at least touch down on the surface of Mars and see what we see. We want to understand as much as possible before we send humans.
We had last year at the Mars Society convention, we had Tiffany Morgan, Deputy Director for the Mars Exploration Program, and she was talking at the convention about the Mars sample return. We're hoping that maybe we'll see her this year again and get an update on, what's happening behind the scenes. Why is that budget so high, and what is the plan moving forward? And maybe by that point there will be an update on the selection process via those proposals that they've requested. So hoping to have more at the convention this year. But I see we have a question, and this is relevant to our conversation right now. So the question is from Mike, and it says, what do you believe is the most important aspect of using the moon for going to Mars?
We don't know anything about living in partial gravity. And that is something that I'm super curious about. as a scientist, I'm a physics scientist, not a life scientist, but like we just don't have that data. And we need to understand, is it possible to live long term without the detriments of microgravity in a low reduced gravity environment where it's significantly reduced on the moon compared to Mars, but it still should give us really good data to understand, can we live a long term without the significant bone loss, without the changes in your brain, without the changes in your eyes, without all these other problems that we experience in long term microgravity. And by long term, we've only been on in microgravity a little bit more than a year. Right now, Russian has the world record. It's just a little bit over a year living in microgravity. So if you want to live on Mars, for example, longer than a year, you need to understand, is Martian gravity going to be good enough? And if not, how do we mitigate against it? Because you have limited room and limited mass to bring, medications or exercise equipment or anything else that you might need to mitigate against those kinds of effects.
I hear you. Speaking of that, we've got another question from Nerd Warrior, which I love Nerd Warrior's name here. I want to make sure that I'm getting to those questions. The question is, have there been any aircraft leaks that necessitated an evacuation on any spacecraft? I don't know the answer to this one.
No, but we have had a Soviet crew die from suffocation in space. I don't know those details. It was quite some decades ago. Ling, I don't know if you know those details either, but those are the only cases of astronauts or cosmonauts dying in space with suffocation. Asphyxiation, I guess that's the term.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That's one I wasn't familiar with. So thanks, Laura, for some context there. A couple other questions that I have. I know we're going to get a few more audience questions here, but I wanted to make sure that, here we go. Eric Christoph asks, on the Mars sample return, what were the biggest subsystem cost drivers and what existing elements could be adapted? That's a good one.
I don't know. I'm not enough of an expert. I don't even know if JPL has released those figures. I would doubt that they have. But you're going to see, at least here in the United States, the way that it works is you want to funnel as much money as possible to certain geographic locations, JPL being one of them. And JPL at the time had no incentive to bring down the cost. So I don't know the details. I'm sorry.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to have to come back to that one. Eric, when we get an answer on that, maybe when we have an opportunity to speak with Tiffany Morgan again, we'll have some more context there. But with both of you being writers, authors, media, communications, I thought this would be relevant, and I wanted to know more from your perspective. So, being an author, we know that with the rapid evolution of digital media and the rise of social media platform, I'm curious to hear from both of you. How do you see the role of journalism, of communications changing, particularly for you and being a journalist and writing for the South China Morning Post? But Laura, you being an author, I know you're working on your third book, but I want to know from both of you, how do you see the role of media, specifically journalism, changing right now in today's landscape? Ling, you want to take that one first?
Well, I would imagine, the business model of journalism as an industry has changed.
Mm-hmm.
We used to rely on advertisement, but now those money has gone to the social media platforms.
Yeah.
So now, like every publication, if not all, they are trying to get subscriptions. So now some of our contents are behind the paywall. And also as a journalist, as a writer, and also my boss, like the editor, and also the management of the newspaper, they have a lot of pressure from page views. So that will decide how we will produce the content. So do we put out things that readers might not like, or shall we keep feeding their existing bias, or like that kind of thing. Yeah, sometimes I wonder if journalism is more really about facts or or even some educational purpose, or is it more about entertaining the readers? I would wonder about that. So that is one thing, and space particularly. When it comes to China, it's a sensitive topic, especially in the evolving media landscape there. Like the censorship, government censorship is getting tighter and tighter. It's very hard to get any information beforehand, like before the mission is launched. It is only after the mission is successful, the launch is successful, that all the state-owned media will release a ton of information for you to digest, to process. So it's and as South China Morning Post is headquartered in Hong Kong, so it's seen as a foreign media. So it's very hard for us to have access to anyone at the top of space missions. So yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about, the scientific facts and here's the data versus is it for entertainment? I think that line is starting to get a little blurred potentially. Laura, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Ling said in that things are difficult right now. I've seen a lot of my journalist friends laid off or having to switch gears, but it's also widening. So you're seeing bloggers, you're seeing YouTube channels, you're seeing people with just live streams streaming on the what does he call it in Boca Chica, Texas? The spaceships. Just people who are outsiders, who aren't formally employed by a media company, who are creating for themselves a career in journalism. In fact, one of my career coaching clients, she actually started out as a blogger and then now is employed by a newspaper as a space journalist. And so you're seeing that widen as more and more people can get more involved and can get their story out there. It might not be for money or it might be for little money, but at least it's not something that's so limited anymore. And I find that exciting, but at the same time, I feel Ling's frustration that things are so tight right now with the actual business of journalism that it causes journalists to suffer because then a lot of these companies are bought up by bigger companies that tend to have an agenda or tend to lay off a lot of its employees, a lot of its journalists, and restructure the whole thing. But one thing that we can say is that things are changing within space in particular when it comes to human spaceflight that is non-governmental. And that'll be interesting to see how that changes because we have these private missions like Inspiration 4 or the Virgin Galactic flights or the Blue Origin flights that are not required by any stretch to report anything that's going on because they're private missions, right? They're not taxpayer funded government missions. And so I think we're going to see a lot more secrecy when it comes to those private missions. Just like if you were to take your luxury vacation, do you want the details of your luxury vacation broadcast to the world or put out in a press release? Even the transcripts or the manifests of who's flying, as we increase the number of private astronauts, we might see that some of these names are not going to be made available to the public because it's going to be changing the way that we view spaceflight. It's going to be much more of a private endeavor and less of a transparent government endeavor.
That's a good call out, and that's a good point. I like that you made that point. Well, a couple of those along the lines of government versus private policy. I see we have a question here from Andrew, and he asked, "How can we inspire the public and lobby government to get us to Mars?" Good question for both of you.
If you are a U.S. citizen, you can contact your elected representatives or anybody who is an elected representative that's not even your elected representative and tell them to fund space, tell them to fund missions to Mars, and tell them why. So you can call them, write to them, visit them in Washington, D.C., visit them in your local state government, visit them anywhere, and just let your opinion be told. Anybody can do this. You can do this right now, although it's after hours, but you can do this tomorrow. Just call up your elected representatives and tell them.
There you go. Perfect answer. Call up your elected representatives. Let's see, Ling, what do you think? How can we inspire the public and lobby government to get us to Mars?
Well, not so many people in China are talking about, really, I mean, humans going to Mars, but certainly maybe more science fiction books Movies will help.
I'd love to see that. You know, we talked to Dr. James Green, the former chief scientist for NASA, and we had talked about him collaborating and providing some context when they were making the movie The Martian. And I think seeing those sci-fi movies, getting the next generation of people excited and interested in space is going to be when we see the next generation, those that do eventually get to colonize Mars. So you're right, Ling, about more sci-fi, more books, more movies, more inspiration to get those people interested in space. I see that we've got a question here. AC asks, could India be a good partner for the Mars sample return? I don't know.
Possibly. They don't have a large budget, but what they do have is success, which is exciting to see. I love seeing how much India has accomplished in such a short period of time with relatively little funding comparatively. And so I don't know if they're focused on Mars sample return. They are focused on space stations. They are, they're focused on launch vehicles. They have their own human spaceflight program that they're trying to launch their own astronauts, or I don't know if they have a special term for it. But it certainly is within their realm because they've done a private Mars mission, or not private. They've done an uncrewed Mars mission is what I mean to say. So absolutely.
Let's see. Speaking of that, the moon, Mars, we've got another question here. So if both of you were given the opportunity, would you go to the moon or Mars?
Absolutely. Especially the moon. It's close.
Yes. Yes.
I love it. No hesitation from either of you. Both of you immediately. Yes. I think we're among good company here, and a lot of the people, our listeners, I'm sure would also, without hesitation, say yes if given the opportunity. I think we're all space enthusiasts, and we all want to see the opportunity for humans to get to Mars. If it would be one of us, that'd be pretty cool as well. I'm not sure that it will be one of us three, but that would be pretty awesome. I'm sure we've got some here that would also do the same. Let's see. I want to know for both of you, Laura. I know you have a career coaching business. That's one of your many agendas and initiatives that you get to work on a daily basis. And Ling, this question also applies to you. But what advice would you give to people that want to get into this industry, that are interested in science, they're interested in space, and they want to make this a potential career? Ling, if maybe they want to be a journalist or they want to be a writer, what advice would you give to them? And Laura as well, from your perspective as a coach, what advice would you give to people that want to get into the space industry?
Well, I don't have much advice, but I would suggest they go to a rocket launch.
There you go.
Okay. To see it and feel it, how powerful it is. And I'm sure everyone will be inspired.
I love it. Okay, good advice. Laura, what about you?
Anybody and everybody who has any kind of background can go into space, and it's all about applying your skill set and your natural talents to space. We talked about journalism, obviously, but it could be anything. It could be art, it could be business, it could be finance, it could be government, it could be really anybody can go to space. So I have a space career coaching program that is actually currently registering. It's a quarterly program. So if you want to go to lauraforczyk.com, you can see the details there. But I also do other types of coaching other than that program. So please let me know if I can help you, if I can guide you. It is one of those things where people feel like they can't, but they can. You have the ability to. You don't even need to go back for another degree, most likely, unless you want to completely switch fields. But you can use the talents you already have and the background you already have and work in space.
I love it. Well, you're going to hear from me. I did sign up for your free 5-day class, get my toes wet. So I'm excited to explore your program. And I would want to just say thank you so much. I appreciate you both being here today and answering so many questions. I know we covered a wide range of topics. So thanks for pivoting as we got some audience questions here. But I want to thank both of you, Ling, Laura, thank you for joining today and speaking with me. And thank you to our audience members who had tuned in to participate in the conversation. We couldn't do this without you guys. So just a big round of applause, a big thank you to everybody that participated today.
Thank you so much, Ashton. And thank you to the Mars Society.
Well, so excited. Thank you to my friends, Liftport, Michael, Leah for operating in the background and helping with us for today. I want to close out today's show. Again, one more thank you to everybody. But let's finish this the way that we always do. The best is yet to come. We'll see you guys next month. Bye, everybody.